Hello everyone. In this short video, we are going to talk about problem identification and policy analysis. So as we already mentioned, to identify the problem, first you need to understand which branch of government are you talking about. Now, if you're talking about changing a law, then you are probably referring to the legislative body. So if you are talking about service delivery, then that's falling into the executive branch. Then you need to understand which level of government are you talking about. Are you referring to the federal government or state or local government? Or, if you are particularly interested in special districts, then you need to understand it may across different level of governments or across like different municipal or local governments. Then you need to identify either based on the function of the government or based on the service area, right? So someone interested in education policies, the others interested in health policy, environmental policy, tax policy, etc. So you need to figure out an area that you really have passion about. Okay, so then we go to the 8 different steps. The first step is identify the problem. Now, someone might say, I have no idea. I'm not particularly interested in any policy, right? So there's some sources you might think, okay, could help you to find a policy that interests you. So my public policy sources, generally speaking, I'm following some of the trade movements. So Twitter moments are gonna give you some ideas developed in recently. All right. So also the National Public Radio. When you drive, right, you listen to it. Usually, that radio station will talk some serious stuff related to public policy, and also Google News. Right? So simply you can. So for instance, here's so this is a bit of old screenshot. So this is Trump's administration, and the Trump's administration. There's many public policy controversials regarding immigration policy. So there's many ways you can find sources for public policy. Then additional one. This is the American Society for Public Administration. This is a professional association news magazine. Right? So you can have access just by click aspa.net.org, and they publish PA Times, and there's many policy-related issues that you can read. So how can we actually define a problem, right? So the first thing is to think about deficits, excess, right? Too much, too little, not enough. Then make the definition evaluative. So based on like which criteria you would say you are going to evaluate it. Then you address the uncertainty, quantify it if possible, diagnose the conditions that cause the problem, at least one condition. Then you will be able to come up with the problem that you can solve. And of course, you need to take the odds into consideration, right? Also, identify the latent opportunities. So by changing the default option from like opt-in to opt-out, or from changing the reference group, for instance, right? So that will help people to either comply with the policy or achieve better policy outcomes. And also you need to avoid common pitfalls in problem definition. Now, one thing I want to particularly emphasize here is this process defines the problem, or problem identification process is you need to iterate. All right, so which means there's no sequential order about all this. When you think about something that you need to change it, then you change it as necessary. All right. So think about the deficits and the axis as mentioned. If we say there are too many homeless people in the United States, so that means it's too many, right? And then another example would be the demand for agricultural water is growing faster than our ability to supply it. Faster than, right? So that's an axis. So the next example will be California's population of school-aged children is growing by 140,000 per year, and our ability to develop the physical facilities in which to educate them is not growing nearly as fast. So which means there's a gap, right? A shortcome, a deficit, right? So probably you need to come up with some ideas, solutions, right? How can you develop more physical facilities to meet the demands? And this thinking of deficits and excess is not useful when the problem is already well structured. Right? So this is particularly true when we're talking about infrastructure, right? So how many roads you need to build, how many miles, right? And a certain period, and the budget is already set. So there's not so much you can do, right? So the only thing you probably need to think about is among a few of contractors, construction contractors, you can ask them to bid, right? It's a kind of an auction, but other than that, the mileage of the roads and the budget, then not too much to be changed. Make the definition evaluative. This is particularly important. All right, you really need to think about like when we are talking about the problem, right? So, or then a failing part. So, what exactly are we talking about? What exactly are we referring to? Now, the first thing we need to think about is the theory. Generally, when we say there's a problem, either the market has a problem, or the society has a problem, or the government has a problem. So we can largely refer to three different failures: market failure, social failure, and government failure. All right. So when we talk about the specific problems, we are going to refer to these series as well. So first, make the definition evaluative. You have some tasks for analysis. So to identify whether and to what extent current policy interventions are failing, right? Are failing to achieve their goals at acceptable cost, or are otherwise falling short. And then to diagnose and remedy all the market, social, and government failures. And also you need to go beyond the issue rhetoric. Define a problem that is, analytically manageable. All right, so you can say there's a problem, but in vague philosophical language that are not analytically manageable, which means you can't evaluate, you can't clearly define it, and that will be problematic, right? And you also need to think like whether or not it makes sense in the light of political and institutional means, right? So maybe it's politically infeasible, then don't come up with a solution like this, right? So this is just, politically infeasible, which means it will not be supported by different parties. And of course, you can't simply echo the issue rhetoric, right? So that's when you are make the definition evaluative, you need to define the problem that is analytically manageable. And also you need to address the uncertainty. So then the most common way we used to address uncertainty is looking at the past, right? So use the past to suggest like something needs to be done in the future, because we really have no idea about uncertainty, right? So we can't foresee a pandemic, an earthquake, or even a war, right? So you really can't predict these things. So the best way you can do is look at the past. Now, quantify it if possible. This is especially important if you want to go to the details to solve a problem. We are going to talk about policy analysis cases that involves quantified evaluative measures. So the first, of course, you need to think about the magnitudes of the deficits and the excess. How big, small, right? How fast, how slow. Now the other, as we said, based on the past records to suggest something in the future, right? So one of the things is very practical called guesstimation. So you need to guesstimate a number. Now, of course, it's not like coming from nowhere. It's based on the past records. So as I already mentioned, that's probably the most practical way that we can do to deal with the uncertainty. Now, diagnose the conditions that causes problems. Now, of course, one important thing is you need to at least come up with one cause. Right? So say then the problem. Now it could be caused by factor A, factor B, factor C, right? But at least you need to come up with factor A and focus on it. Then it will help you to clearly define a problem that can be mitigated, solved, or removed. Right? Now, even after all, okay, you finally find out among a set of factors that causes a specific problem, the cause you identified, right? Factor A you identified is not exactly the main cause, or it's simply misleading. But at the later stage, you'll be easily to get rid of it, right? So, as long as you clearly define it. So let me give you an example. It says, one of the problems in the air pollution area is the states haven't been willing to force motorists to keep their engines tuned up and their exhaust system in proper order. So this is very specific, right? So now air pollution, of course, as we know, this is a huge problem. Now down to the very specific regulational problem that's states haven't been willing to force motorists, right, to keep their engine and the exhaust system in proper order. So this is quite specific. Now you may say, okay, at the end of the day, this is only cause a very minimum level, contributing a minimum level to the air pollution. It's even not that important. It's totally can be ignored in reality. Then, during the needed scrutiny process, it can be excluded. However, at the beginning stage, you need to be as specific as possible. At least this is one cause being identified, right? Very specific. So then we need to think about the odds, the probabilities, used to referring to risks in probabilities, right? So you may say the odds are too high that this nuclear reactor will suffer an accident in the next 25 years that will emit excessive radiation. Now this is the odds are too high, okay? And it can be used to for talking about risks that are particularly resistant to precise quantification. Sometimes you just need to guesstimate it. Now, for example, the odds that the U.S. nuclear modernization program is causing other countries to look more favorably on acquiring nuclear weapons themselves. So that odds is used because you can't precisely quantify the probability that the U.S. nuclear modernization program will actually cause other countries to acquire nuclear weapons by themselves, right? So it's very hard for you to quantify it, but at least you can say the odds, right? So it's probably too high. You can say that. And they're used for specifying criteria. Maximizing the odds that the Libertarian Party will control the upper chamber following the next election. Now, this is the odds, but used for specifying the criteria. So you probably can sense by now, when we are talking about problem definition or identifying a problem, you need to be as specific as possible. If that's quantifiable, then quantify it. If that's regards to the odds, then make sure you consider about it, right? But whether or to what extent, then the problem, you need to be as specific as possible. Now, some latent opportunities you can identify is you can design the architecture of choice. As we said, for instance, 401k retirement plan, right? So you can nudge people to opt out versus the current system actually ask you to opt in. Right? So you register them first, say, okay, you still have the choice. If you don't want to be enrolled, then you can choose to opt out. So this by changing the default setting, right, to increase the enrollment rate. Now the other thing is, of course, you need to change the social norms, right? Peer pressure, for instance. You can say, okay, most of their class is working really, really hard, and you can even give them a chart, say how many hours they spend on one particular class, right? Trying to motivate the others to work hard as well. Now, then the book I want to recommend to you, if you have time, I strongly encourage you to read it. So this is written by Richard Thaler and Cesar Sandstein. The book is called Nudge. Richard Thaler won a Nobel Economic Prize, and Cesar Sandstein is the Chief Information Officer in the Obama administration, and of course, he himself is a very productive and famous scholar in the field. So last warning, you need to avoid common pitfalls in problem definition. You don't want to define the solution into the problem. So for example, you don't need to say then too little shelter for homeless families. If you say this, which means you are implying more shelter will be the best solution, right? So you can try, when you identify the problem, you simply state too many families are homeless. Now, if possible, quantify it, right? For instance, 6,000 families are homeless during this winter in West Michigan area. So for instance, so that will be very specific, okay? And also, do not accept too easily the causal claims implicit in a diagnostic problem definition. All right, so for instance, it states cocaine use may become a huge problem if it leads to crime, poor health, and family disintegration. But is that true? Is this all because of cocaine use? Right? So to what degree? Now, if you haven't have any sound evidence, don't use these hearsay to come up to a causal claim easily. Okay. All right. Now, as I said before, you need to iterate. Okay. So there's no sequential order. Say you need to do this first, do exercise or deficits first, and do the avoid the common pitfalls as the last. There's no such order. Now, even for the 8 different steps, it's you also need to iterate, right? So when you come up to the later steps, you find out, okay, you need to modify the previous ones. Then of course you do it. All right. So then no order from step 1 to 8, and some of the steps move simultaneously. That's why I encourage you to think in advance when you are starting with your first step. All right. And don't be afraid. Sometimes you feel, okay, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's okay, right? If that can help you to come up with a better solution to a problem, that's all worth it. All right, so then repeat over and over again. All right, so that will be all about this video. Thank you very much.